Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, your RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Walls.
We appreciate all the support in the recent content. Reminder, we do read comments from our recent videos. And Boehners on TikTok, he said, so signing a wash, Klay Thompson is a good thing now? Yeah, 100%. I think that it is a good thing. He could still hit the three ball. He shot 38% from the three last season. That's all they really need him to do. They need him to just space the floor a little bit just to take some pressure off of Kyrie and Luka to the point where, maybe they don't get doubled as much. And, that's where they can kind of flourish and, attack single coverage.
I mean, at the end of the day, even though he's not the same player that he used to be, he can still hit a jump shot, at a decent clip. And, like you said, it's going to make it tougher to be able to double off of those two guys. Because, like Derek Jones Jr., as good as he was last year, right, by the time he got to the finals, as we mentioned in the Dallas video, right, they were leaving him open, just daring him to hit jumpers, and he just couldn't. Obviously, it's a different type of player compared to Derek Jones Jr., but it is a talent upgrade, even if the fit is a little bit different, mainly on the defensive end, because, you don't have that cheat code of a guy with, crazy athleticism and length, right? It's more of like a, textbook defensive guy, even though, again, he's not quite the same defender anymore, right? So it'll be a different look, but I think overall it'll still be a positive, especially because it's not like a crazy contract. You're not paying him $25 million a year, or he's certainly not making anywhere near what he used to make, which he shouldn't, because he's not that type of player anymore.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with everything you said. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so now we're moving on, continuing through the Southwest Division. Today, it's the San Antonio Spurs, right? Obviously, the Spurs, right, are a team that, looked kind of not great a couple seasons ago, right? But then they got the bailout of a lifetime. They got the number one pick, and that pick happened to be Victor Wembanyama, who took the league by storm, right? Obviously, we knew he was going to be really good, right? We were talking about him prior to the draft, during the season before. And he did not disappoint. He was even better, I think, than people expected, right? 21 a game, just under 11 rebounds, 4 assists, and led the league in blocks with 3.6 a game and was all defense first team as a rookie, right? Just an unbelievable rookie season in 71 games and just under 30 minutes a game, too, which is absurd. Unfortunately, the Spurs were still very bad last year, right? I mean, you look at their record, and it was not particularly the best. I mean, their record was 22-60, right? Which was actually about the same. It was the exact same record as the year before, right? So despite getting the number one pick, their record was just as bad, right? Obviously the league was better, but still wasn't a great look. They were 24th or 23rd on offense, 24th in defense. Yeah, they stunk. Although, funny enough, when Wemby was out there, they were basically, like an even, slightly positive team, which is just crazy, right?
Yep.
Considering, their net rating was very negative, right? It was, it was bad, right? It was basically just under 6, -6, which is, that's not good. But either way, they had a really, intriguing offseason where there were a lot of moving parts, right? A lot of guys coming in that I wasn't really expecting. Because obviously the year before there was a thought process. Maybe they chase after a guy like a Brook Lopez. Maybe they signed some other veteran guy, to bring in. But they did it instead this season, right? They actually kind of balanced it out because they had some draft picks, but they also had some veteran free agents, right? I guess we can start um, with the I guess we'll start with the draft pick, right? Just because of the fact that that's kind of the key guy there, right? And they drafted Stephon Castle, number 4 overall. We basically had him mocked going there because of the fact that you look at him from a guard perspective, right? He's a good athlete, right? He's got good size. The main question, obviously, for him is that can he add on to his guard skills, right? Can he get some, can he get some reps as a jump shooter, right? Can he maybe increase his playmaking? Because he's got good athleticism and he's got very good defensive intangibles and defensive abilities. And that's the type of guy that could possibly be a good fit next to Wemby if he can figure out the jump shot. He is a good cutter, so he's clearly is a smart basketball player. So you kind of assume that even if he doesn't have the jump shot right away, he can kind of do some other things as well. But, we both liked the pick because of the fact that, again, it was a guard. which you needed with Wemby. And it was a guy that, again, Wemby doesn't necessarily have to kind of completely carry on the defensive end. Obviously, what was initially wild was they also had took Rob Dillingham with the 8th pick, but then they traded him to Minnesota for future first-round picks, which was kind of interesting. That was very surprising and shocking at the time. I think we were disappointed in them doing that.
Mm-hmm.
We've mellowed down on it since, but it was still just kind of surprising, just given the fact that, that could have possibly been, a future backcourt. But, we'll just have to see where things continue to go from there, right? Maybe they're just kind of like, well, let's kind of try to compete now. We'll see how that works out. I don't know. But I thought it was a really good pick regardless, right? Just because of the fact of what he can do. Obviously, again, everybody's got weaknesses, and he's still young. He's just 20 years old, so he's got plenty of time to continue to grow and develop. But when you look at their other acquisitions, they acquired Chris Paul on a 1-year, $10 million deal, right? In a move that I think was kind of unexpected. This was another guy where it was kind of possibly suggested last year that maybe the Spurs go after Chris Paul if he were to, possibly get waived or cut or whatever it was by
Right.
Phoenix or something like that.
Right.
But it didn't happen. But now he's here. And again, you look at the year that Chris Paul had, a year ago, and it was the first time ever, right, that he was a backup, right? He started in 17 games, but he played 58. And in those games, he averaged 9 points, just under 7 assists, a little over a steal, 44 from the field, 37 from 3. His numbers at the beginning of the year were pretty awful because of the fact that he couldn't really do anything other than hit jumpers, and the jumper wasn't falling in the beginning of the year. Just,
Mm-hmm.
but again, obviously he's at a point in his career now where he's not as capable of consistently getting to the basket because he doesn't have the same level of quickness or burst. But, he still has the mid-range game, right? He has improved as a three-point shooter over the years, right? 37 from 3, that's still good. So, again, obviously he's also a great playmaker passer still, right? He's still a guy that doesn't really turn the ball over a ton and can get guys in the spots that they need to. So he's just a great organizer, right? Like a floor general point guard. And so that could be a guy that could, really get, Wemby and other guys for the Spurs offense going, right? Because, Wemby was obviously very solid for San Antonio. But the rest of the team, it's not that everybody played poorly. It was just that, because they didn't have a really good option at guard, it was kind of a mess. Right now, early in the season, the big issue was that they didn't even really play a point guard in the rotation, right? It was Jeremy Sohan as the starting point guard, and that just didn't really work out. Again, not that he's not a bad player at all, right? He's actually honestly a solid player that's got a lot of good skill sets. He's just not a point guard. Now, he's a decent passer. He averaged 3.4 assists to 1.9 turnovers, so his assists went up by almost an entire point, and his turnovers barely went up. So that's good. It's just, again, developing him into a point guard is just not ideal. I can understand a Draymond Green type thing where, yeah, he has the ball and kind of, acts as a playmaker, short roll guy. That's fine. But, I just don't think he has enough of a handle plus vision to be able to kind of operate as a point guard, right? Maybe as a secondary, a tertiary playmaker guy, that's fine. Maybe in the high post, top of the key, okay. But also, right, the 3-point shooting wasn't really there. It got better than it was, to be fair, the year before, right? As a rookie, it was 25%. Now it's 31%. And, that's going to have to grow anyways as a team because the Spurs as a team were not a very good 3-point shooting team. And that's because they didn't really have a lot of great 3-point shooters, unfortunately. But, and, you look around at the rest of the roster. They added Harrison Barnes, right? They got they got him in that DeMar DeRozan deal that sent DeMar DeRozan from Chicago to Sacramento, and Sacramento sent Barnes to San Antonio, right? And he's obviously, again, another guy that's not quite the same as he once was, like Chris Paul, right? Obviously he's not quite as good as he was for the Mavs, right? Even, the first few seasons for the Kings. But, he can still do some things, right? He's still a good 3-point shooter. He's still a decent athlete. But I don't know, right? He's not bad or anything, but he's still not quite the same guy. But at the very least, in the starting 5, if his 3-point shot continues to stay pretty consistent, which it seems like it has, because he's been, at worst 37% across the last 5 years, right? From 2018 onwards, 39.5, 38, 39, 39, 37, 38.7. So the last few years, he's been a good 3-point shooter. So that's a guy that if they do slide him into that starting five, as the small forward, he could be a decent 3-point, stretch forward or whatever. So, I mean, I think that's a good addition just because of the fact that he's a good 3-point shooter. I'm curious to see what happens with Keldon Johnson, right? Because he was a starter for the Spurs for a long time, but last season, he spent a decent amount of time as a bench guy, right? He
Mm-hmm.
only started 27 of the 69 games he played last season, and his numbers just haven't been haven't been the same.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll kind of see if he's a long-term piece. Devin Vassell, right? That's another guy who's a young player, 24. Now he's making big money, right? He's making 30 million this year, basically. His contract numbers kind of go down each year, so that's nice. And we'll see what he kind of does this season. But he's been steadily improving. Last year he averaged 19 and a half a game, right? 47 from the field, 37 from three. So you'll take that. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think he's a good player. He's basically like a 3-and-D guard wing, right? That's got some creation skills, got some playmaking skills. So I like that. I think that's a good player to fit next to Wemby. So you have like a decent group of guys, that are young players that I think can fit. Not all of them are going to be long-term guys, but I think some of those main core guys are solid pieces, right? And then you look around, right? You still have Zach Collins, right? Initially, he was starting next to Wemby, right? And then later they were like, nah, these guys probably shouldn't start together. And that actually, again, that made things work, right? They took out Zach Collins and they replaced him with Trey Jones as the starting point guard, and that worked. And it's not like Trey Jones is an elite starting point guard, but he's actually a point guard, right? And as it turns out, when you have an actual point guard in your starting five, better things can happen for a lot of players. And then after that, still have some other young guys, Malachi Branham, Julian Champagnie, right? Young guys that they've taken flyers on, and we'll see how they continue to progress. Still have Charles Bassey coming off an ACL injury, Sandro Mamukalashvili, right, as another backup big man. So they do have a lot of options. CD Sissoko, who they drafted the year before. The
Proud of
only
them.
issue is that, the thing is that it does sound like they have a decent amount of depth, right? Like it sounds like you have 9, 10 decent playable guys. It's just the issue is that, you know, if one of those guys doesn't pan out, then it starts to kind of turn into a real problem where all right, now you're going to have to start to rely on some of these other guys that probably wouldn't be normal rotation guys on a good team, right? Like a Blake Wesley, um, or even a Champagnie. And I'm not saying these guys are bad. I'm just saying it's just, like Champagnie was starting a lot last year for Keldon Johnson because Keldon Johnson wasn't playing as well, and it seemed like he just fit better with the second unit. So the Spurs, second unit should be better than it was last year, just because of the fact that a guy like Trey Jones goes from being a starter to a backup, right? With Chris Paul starting in his place, I'm gonna assume he starts, right? So I'm gonna assume it's gonna be Paul, Vassell, probably Barnes, and then Sohan and Wemby, right? So that's a decent starting five. It's not an elite starting five, but again, at least you have a little bit more shooting. You still have some length, but it's just again the question is that some people have kind of maybe suggested that they could be a play-in team. I think that may be a little bit of a stretch just because of the fact that the Western Conference, a lot of other teams did improve, and I don't necessarily know if the Spurs will be able to win enough games to get there. But I think at the very least, you got to hope that they win more than 22 games. Just because of the fact that, again, when you got a guy as good as Wemby, you got to be a little bit better than that. And they did add some extra pieces that are solid. So either way, they had a good offseason in terms of you added some respectable veterans, right, that have been leaders in their previous stops, right? Because Barnes was the veteran leader for the Kings. Chris Paul is the veteran leader for most of the stops he's been in. Obviously, he's been moved around and, passed around a lot. But either way, he's a guy that clearly, meshes well with a lot of young players. Young players seem to like him a lot just because of the fact that he's a guy that seems like you can learn a lot from. And he's got some skills and qualities as a point guard that I think people like. He'll get people involved, which you want with a lot of these players, right? Because you have a lot of players that, the Spurs actually do have a lot of guys that are good passers and playmakers. It's just you kind of would like another guy that can also kind of put it all together, right? And I think that's what Chris Paul could possibly do for them. Again, he is 39. He's an older guy at this point, which is again, like he's one of the oldest in the league, playing a position that I feel like, again, will not be kind to guys that are 39 years old at times. But, hey, he's got Wemby flanking him, so that should help because that guy can basically block anybody in the league. So I like a lot of what they did. I just don't necessarily know if I can confidently say, like, oh, yeah, this is going to be a team that's going to challenge for the play-in. Like, they'll be better for sure, but I still think they're probably going to be somewhere between like 11 to 15 in the Western Conference again. Not 14, 15, but you know what I mean? Like, I feel like they're still going to be outside of the play-in. And I don't think that's a bad thing for the Spurs because I think, this progression, from these guys, you're going to be better, right? Like, the main thing is, like, does the product itself actually make more sense? Because, like, the Spurs won the same amount of games last year as they won the year before. But at times, it almost felt like it was messier aside from Wemby, right? Like there were not a lot of bright spots for the Spurs last season outside of Wemby. But I think you hope this year maybe they win like 28 games, right? But which would still probably be bottom tier of the Western Conference. But it's a good 28 games where you see progression from Wemby, you see progression from guys like Devin Vassell, or Jeremy Sohan, right? Stephon Castle looks like a solid rookie that continues to, get more and more minutes as the year progresses. Maybe even a CD Sissoko comes in as like an athletic, defensive minded, versatile guy, right? So I think that's kind of what you're hoping for. Maybe at the deadline, some guys might get moved. Like maybe, Chris Paul plays well and he gets moved to, some playoff team. Not saying it's going to happen, but something like that. Or a Harrison Barnes, right? Since he's got 2 years left on his deal. Or some other guy, in on this team, right? I'm not saying I expect it, but it's just with the Spurs, you have versatility to do both because you're gonna win more games. Like I said, I just don't feel like that they're gonna be, a playoff team or even like a play-in team. But again, with Wemby, that's the real X factor because again, if he is, like a borderline top 10 guy or better, right, then it's gonna be really hard, for them to be right at the bottom of the Western Conference again, just because of how good he is. And the fact that even last year, as terrible as they were almost an even team, with him out there basically. But I still feel like even at his best, it still might be a stretch to feel like it's a play-in team. And I still feel like even though they do have depth, I still feel like relative to the rest of the Western Conference, it's not going to be enough to be able to get into the play-in. But I think either way, they should be better. And that's a good thing. Because like I said, it's not a bad thing if they miss the playoffs and miss the play-in again. Because then you'll still have a lottery pick. And you'll be able to add again. Or you can possibly make a deal in the offseason or something like that. But, I think they're in a good spot, though, with Wemby as the number one pick. But, thank goodness he's there. Because if he wasn't, yeah, I don't know. I would feel not very good about it. But I think, having him makes things easier, right? Because you're not a team like, say, Washington, right, where you still haven't quite found your guy yet. Or, even, I don't know, even like a team like, I mean, I guess Portland kind of maybe with Scoop, but we still don't really know yet. We have to see,
Yeah.
right? You don't have necessarily at that point for a team like that a certified number one guy just yet. But with the Spurs, you do. And that's the toughest part, right? Then after that, right, then you just kind of have to find, how can we build a team around him? And this is kind of step one in doing that. Because last year, right, the team was kind of already put together before he was even there. Now this is the first real offseason where it's like, all right, we saw him, we know what he can do. And, now we'll see, what it looks like, with some additional actual NBA players on this roster, right? Whereas the guys who were playing before, who were like borderline, now they're replaced with guys that are legitimate NBA players.
Yeah, man. I mean, I give them an A plus for this offseason. I think the way that you have to look at it is, like you said, starting from last year, they did a ton of questionable crap throughout the entire season, and I think
Yeah.
most NBA fans were kind of tuned in to the Spurs more than they probably ever have been since the Tim Duncan that kind of dynasty.
Hmm.
And yeah, like I think losing 60 games was egregious because I don't think anybody really saw that coming. I think it was very intentional, and you could definitely tell because that's intentional taking. You don't just put Sohan at point guard, you know? And I think the cool thing is we kind of saw flashes of what this team could really look like if they had, like, you know, a true playmaker, because when Trey Jones was the point guard, they looked a lot better. Wemby looked a lot
Yeah.
better too. So, you know, if you're going to upgrade at point guard, which they did, they're bringing in Chris Paul. Chris Paul is going to be better than Trey Jones. I think that's an automatic A. Harrison Barnes, you know, that adds another wing, another competent wing, because like you said, Keldon Johnson kind of just got put in the doghouse. And then obviously pairing, I think Harrison Barnes with Vassell is going to be really cool as well, because I think they can do some similar things. And he could easily learn from him as well. And then Stephon Castle, I feel like that's going to be the big one. Because that could be like a passing of the torch moment where, you know, if Chris Paul can kind of help him refine his playmaking, yeah, it's
Hmm.
GG's, because he has all the defensive tools and all that stuff. The jump shot will hopefully come with time. I think we've seen flashes of that in college, even in the summer league a little bit. So, you know, I think all around they had a great offseason. They improved at every position. You know, like you said, all the stupid stuff that they were doing last season, I don't think we'll see this season, because there is a level of seriousness. I think last year was the protection of Wemby. You know, we kind of got to see just a glimpse of, you know, what kind of future he's going to have in the league. Because keep in mind, a lot of the season he was on a minutes restriction. And a
Yep.
lot of the guys actually were on minutes restrictions, which is interesting. You know, all that stuff is coming out now. That like the trio, like of Trey Jones, Vassell, Wemby, they weren't getting a whole lot of minutes. So, like I said, I think last year was more of a tankathon for them, which is fine, because I think they're in that asset gathering phase of their rebuild where they're trying to accumulate as many assets as they can. You know, you presumably hit on Stephon Castle in that draft pick, which is cool. And then I think trading away the Robert Dillingham, or trading away Rob Dillingham for the future first round picks, opens a gateway to, okay, you know, maybe once Wemby makes his ascension, we can bring in a super, not a superstar, but a star, with some considerable, you know, return, I guess, you know, for those first round picks that you can use to bring in somebody who's maybe disgruntled or something like that. I don't know. But I think they're playing the long game, which is cool, but also they're not just letting Wemby kind of waste his career away, or, you know, the early parts of his career, because I think this will be a competitive team. Like you said, the West is super duper competitive, so you probably won't see them make a playoff or play in push, but I think they'll be right outside of it, because there's no way that you can't, considering, you know, that you upgraded from a talent perspective pretty much at every single position. And you obviously have Wemby, who, I've stated multiple times, I think he's going to be top 10 All NBA. So, yeah, I think the Spurs did a great job.
Yeah, I mean, again, and you look at that, guard spot, like you mentioned with Stephon Castle, right? Like, there's not too many other guards, that you could realistically grab,
Yeah.
right? To play and alongside him, right? Like that you could learn from than Chris Paul, because that's a guy that's going to be a future Hall of Famer. Again, like a floor general guy, and like you said, he can still kind of help this team in certain ways. It's just a matter of, again, how much does he still have left in the tank. He was a backup last year. Now he's going to be starting again. But like you said, it's a guy that's been in a lot of competitive games. And, that's going to be good for this Spurs team because, like you said, it adds an extra layer of seriousness, right? Which just was just not there, the last couple of seasons. Like you
Yeah.
said, Wemby, was serious, right? But, outside of that, you didn't really get a ton of that, from, the organization itself,
Sure.
right? And so, is an example possibly of like a great player just kind of like uplifting an organization, kind of almost, on his own, right? Like, it's kind of feeling that way because I mean, it's just kind of wild where you look at the Spurs, draft history in recent years, prior to Wemby, and you have some solid picks, right? Like you had Sohan at 9, right? We'll see how he progresses, right? And that pick kind of felt like a reach by a lot of people, but I think he's been, much better than I think people would have expected, right? Then you have Branham, Blake Wesley, right? We'll see how those guys are, who knows, right? Josh Primo at 12, right? That was, that ended up not really panning out all that
No.
great. Devin Vassell at 11, that's cool, right? Trey Jones in the second round, that's cool. And then, Luka Samanic, I don't even think he's in the league anymore. He was the
Hmm.
19th overall pick. Keldon Johnson, 10 picks later, still hanging around playing, fine. Lonnie Walker, Derek White traded him away for, just crazy.
Yeah.
Not even going to get into that one, but I understand at that point they were also tanking, so
Hmm.
we'll see. But either way, so I guess the question is for Wemby, right, going into year two, what type of things are we looking at for him to kind of progress with, right? Because I think, I think one of the, kind of obvious ones, I guess, would be the 3-point shot. He only shot 32.5% from three. And we understood because we talked about it, right? He did not actually shoot well from three when he was, playing overseas, right? Before he came to the Spurs, right?
Hmm.
He was, kind of around that low 30s, upper 20s percentage from three, right? And that's a different 3-point line, right? 5.5 attempts a game. So you would assume and hope that that continues to improve. I think the passing and playmaking is awesome. Obviously, 4 assists, just under 4 turnovers. But again, the team was a mess. I don't really, mind the turnovers, right? Just because of, how the team is, right? The rebounding is great. Obviously, we continue to, everybody knows and understands, right? You'll continue to need to add some, extra muscle and strength to that frame, which is still like a stronger frame than you think, but you can still kind of see at times, right? Like, even in the Olympics, right? At times, like, with the American team, there are a few times where, you could get a little bit more physical with him, but that's just kind of what you expect, right? With a 19, 20-year-old. So, what are we looking from him or for him, or I guess from him in year two, where, in terms of like tangible improvements, right? Outside of, a couple of the things that I mentioned.
I would say efficiency. I think that's number one, and that's across the board. Whether it be from three, whatever he wants to take. I personally think he probably shouldn't be taking five
Hmm.
threes a game. I would cut that down to maybe three.
Right.
Um,
Post it.
yeah, and with the post work, that's what I want to see. I want to see,
Yeah.
and I know it's dead. It's a dying breed, dying art, but I think he has it. And he definitely has the frame and ability and touch as well. Because I think that's the cool thing is he for sure has touch and he showcased that. It's just he doesn't
Yeah.
really, do it as much. He's really more of like it's the freakiest thing ever. He's like a 7'4" point guard. If you want me to be real, but at the end of the day, I think he can tap into some more of his big man attributes where it's like, yeah, just shoot over people. Fade. Don't make things super duper complicated. And I get it. He has a bag, a very deep bag, especially for a guy his size. We've never seen it really before. But at the end of the day, I think he can simplify things, and that will make him more efficient.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I think some of that efficiency just by having Chris Paul and an additional guard that might just help in general because
Exactly.
that might get him some more easy looks as well, right? Just because it's a little tougher to create some of those easy looks, without some type of facilitator, true facilitator out there. So I think that will help. But I think, like you said, the addition of some extra post work around the basket because again, he's a very tall guy, right? He's a very tall a human being,
Yeah.
a very tall basketball player. So I mean, if they can get him some more consistent looks around the basket, I think that would be good because again, who's going to be able to contest that, right? Like you said, obviously, it's not that you don't want him taking threes at all, but you don't have to necessarily take like a super high volume of threes,
Yeah.
right? Like, because I don't know if he'll ever be like a 40% 3-point shooter, right? He may, and of course, we don't know what his ceiling is going to be, but, it's possible he could cap out at like 37, or something
It's
like that, which
fine.
is still really good. And you could still take a high volume of threes. Again, Luca took 10 threes a game, shooting 38% from three. So it's
Yeah.
not that he can't. It's just, again, can you add some extra balance, right, to your game as well? And we know he can score in the post fine. It's just
Yeah.
like you said, can he continue to add there? And again, even if you're not like a super strong guy, there's still certain aspects in the post that I think you could still continue to add on to, from a skill standpoint. And again, he also, and he can post, and that's where he can do some playmaking as well, right? They could run some more sets where he's got the ball in the high post with his back to the basket or facing up, and that's where he might be able to find, guys cutting to the basket, or passing it to open shooters and things like that. And again, some of that will come with extra reps and extra development, and some of that will also just come with additional talent on the floor. Because sometimes, like say in the summer league, right, like. You're not going to get mad at some of the summer league performances because it's like, hey, he's trying his best, but like, the summer league is not really a great outlet for a lot of bigs
Sure.
because everybody, understandably so, is trying to make a name for themselves, trying to get onto, some type of roster. And you'd have scenarios where he'd be wide open, and he wouldn't necessarily get the ball, too many times. We
Yeah,
saw it in person a year ago, so we can attest to that.
100%.
But but either way, I think that's kind of the big thing where it's just, if he continues to improve like we expect him to, that's going to be a big part of the Spurs, just improving, right? Because again, you kind of have a baseline floor where like if you have, a player that's like in the X percentile of the league, it's kind of hard to be like a bottom 5 NBA team unless you have that guy, but he just doesn't play a lot. Like if he
Sure.
misses, a good chunk of the season, it's just really difficult to be that bad when you have a player like that. Obviously, we've seen scenarios where it's like, well, yeah, a guy can still only do so much with X, amount of talent on the
Hmm.
team. I'm
Hmm.
just saying for the regular season,
Right.
that's a little bit tougher, to accomplish. Like they'd have to try to be as bad as they were last year, but I think they could still, in theory, win more games. But placement wise in the West, not be much different. Like they
Sure.
could win 29, 30 games, and that still might not be good enough to crack, 10th place in the Western Conference because
Yeah.
you still have to factor in most of the teams from last year that were, 1 to 10 in the West are going to be 1 to 10 presumably this year unless there's injuries. Then you still have to throw Memphis in there, so then that's 11, right?
Yeah.
So then, Houston, right? Houston had a better record than the Spurs, even though they don't have a Wemby. They have a more complete roster than San Antonio and a deeper roster, even though the players at the top aren't Wemby. And that, but again, they may have a little bit more volatility. Who knows? But regardless, um, it's interesting because again, like I said, I gave them an A for their offseason, and I think it was good. It's just a question of how much better will they be? Because like I said, I think they will be better, but I also said I don't think they have to make the playoffs in order for them to kind of show like that they realistically improve, right? Like I said, if they can win close to 30 games, I think I'd be pretty satisfied personally with that. Like if they can get somewhere around 30, then I'm good with that. But if it's something less, then if it's like around 25, I think that's kind of a problem. But if
Agreed.
you look at their over under is 36 and a half, which is really high,
Ooh,
which is,
that's
that's
high.
that's pretty, which is really high, and that's my point where I'm like, I don't know if I can see them getting to 36 and a half. I mean, much better than that, and that's getting closer to like a 500 team, and I just don't necessarily know if they're going to be good enough to be that good, even with as much as I believe in Wemby. But what are your thoughts on that over under? Again, as we've talked about, we don't bet, we don't offer betting advice, but it just kind of gives us a guideline for where a lot of the Vegas insiders and people think that these teams are at.
So I think they finish outside of the plan. I think that they go under, not
Yeah.
significantly. I could see them winning 33 games. If you want me to be real, I could see them finishing right where Utah finished last season, um, around that 12 area. Because I
Hmm.
like you said, Houston I think will be better. Memphis will be better as well. So I think San Antonio will take a rise, and Utah maybe falls a little bit.
Hmm. Yeah, and I would say under two. I just
Yeah,
feel like that's a lot. I mean, 36 and a half. I mean, you're talking about almost a 15 win improvement, which
yeah,
again can happen for sure. I just don't know if I would expect that in this Western Conference with this Spurs team. I just
yeah.
feel like that might be, a tall task, right? Like say like a Memphis I could see winning 20 more games. I'm not going to put an exact number, but you know what I mean. But their situation is unique because
Sure,
of all of the injuries from last year. But with
sure.
the Spurs, like, yeah, they improved, but I don't know if I would say they improved to almost 500, almost a 500 team. I think that they improved to, around, like you said, somewhere between 29 to 33 wins, I think, is probably, I think, a more realistic expectation for
Yeah,
them. I just think 36 and a half is too high. But
yeah.
again,
Agreed.
hey, if Wemby, puts together a crazy, like you said, all NBA year, I mean, maybe. I mean, but I
It's a
feel like even
possible.
that,
It really is.
yeah, like
It
it's
all starts with him,
possible.
though. It all starts at the top.
Yeah, right. And that's kind of what I've been getting at is that I think that's kind of the big X factor. Because, let's say he's better than he was last year. But maybe not quite good enough to be like all NBA, right? Well, then that probably isn't enough to get to, that mark.
No,
But if he's like somewhere, around second team all NBA, right? Then then that could get it done. But that's going to still be really difficult just because of his competition at that spot. Now, obviously, they don't do positions anymore; it's positionless, so that will help him. But I don't necessarily know if he's going to get voted over, certain guys. He'll get voted over some, but I think there are other players where I feel like he may have a hard time getting, voted in over unless they're, right there. So,
Yeah.
but either way, like it's possible, but I think like that's probably the absolute ceiling. And I feel like if that's the absolute ceiling, that's why, like I said, I think 29 to 33 is a little bit more realistic. I mean, you look at the Western Conference over unders, the only teams that have lower over unders than them is the Jazz and the Trailblazers.
Hmm.
And the Jazz are, well, we'll get into them when we cover those teams, but basically, it's a decent distance away, with those teams, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, the Spurs are better than those. I feel like, yeah, the Spurs are better than those two teams, but are they, you know, 10, 6 to 10, 15 wins better? Like, I don't know about that. Like, I just feel like the other teams in the West, you're going to have to beat a lot of good teams in order to get there because of the fact that, all those teams in the West, you play at least, 3 or 4 times. And, some of those teams are really good. And I just feel like it might be tough for them to consistently beat a lot of good teams. But, because, like, to be fair, like last season, you had that stretch, that latter part of the year where Wemby, and keep in mind, this was like, post Devin Vassell or post Keldon Johnson, like a bunch of their, better players being gone. And it's Wemby and a lot of the lower half of the roster. And they were, playing on par or in some cases beating, some of these, decent teams, right? Like they beat the Nuggets in that game. They beat the Pelicans. I mean, they got a lot of wins down the stretch that were impressive. Again, it's towards the end of the season, so sometimes that can kind of cloud our perception of like, was this legit or not? But, hey, it's still a win is a win. But either way, like I said, just kind of to sum it up, they'll be better, but not better enough, I think, to make the plan. But that's okay, right? They're not in the same boat as some of these other teams where, if you don't make the plan, that's like, an absolute failure of a season. I don't think it's a failure. I think a successful season is, like you said, competing for the plan. And even if you miss it, maybe you're kind of close, something like that. But, if it's something akin to last year or the year before, that's a failure. But I don't anticipate that will happen unless there's some horrific injury luck for, the team.
Yeah, agreed. 100%.
Yeah, and even Wemby himself, like you said, on a minutes restriction, but he still played in 71 games,
Yeah,
right? So, I'm
very
going to
healthy.
assume he will play more than 29 minutes a game next season.
Yeah.
And I think he'll have to if they want to win, more games, right?
Yeah.
But, again, there was no need necessarily to like completely overtax him last year.
Yeah.
And we
They were
saw
protecting
enough in
him.
the minutes that yeah, exactly. And we saw enough in the minutes that he played that yeah, this guy is going to be and already is an incredible player.
Yeah.
Again, as many have said, including myself, like this, might be the worst. Last season might be the worst he'll ever be. And he gave you 20 and 10 and almost 4 blocks a game,
Yeah,
which is just
exactly.
absurd.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. So, I mean, is there anything else from a Spurs perspective, or or is that kind of it? Like, are there
Um,
any other players that you might be looking at, on the roster, that might kind of jump out and surprise you, or have we kind of touched all the bases?
I mean, I think we covered all the bases on the Spurs. You know, it kind of goes back to just a bunch of internal development. And I don't think we're gonna see them reap all the benefits until a little bit later on. But this is a good start because you're adding talent. That's the problem that they had last year. I don't think they had enough talent to look like a capable NBA team. But now, the starting five, they look, pretty legit. You adding some veterans too, some serious veterans who, not necessarily have winning experience, but have experience in
Yeah,
different situations. And I think that will add to Wemby's development and the entire team as well. Because I think it's not just Wemby. There are a lot of moving parts here, but once again, it does start at the top. Like the Spurs ceiling is Wemby ceiling.
yeah, exactly. And again, let us know your thoughts in the comments on the Spurs, their offseason. What did you think of what they did? How good do you think they'll be? How good do you think Wemby will be? And is there another guy on the roster that could take their game to another level? Like I said, I feel like it's Vassell. I think he'd be, the other next best guy on the team. But after that, it just kind of depends on if maybe a guy like a Keldon Johnson has a bounce back year, or obviously if one of the veterans has like a solid year, something like that. But we'll see. But just kind of now getting into the other news and rumors around the league. Isaac Okoro, according to Woj, finally got finally got a deal. He was restricted free agent, agrees to 3-year, $38 million deal. So basically, a little around 13 million a year. So again, kind of interesting just because of the fact that it was a little surprising how he hadn't been signed up until this point, right? Because obviously we know he had a decent regular season, and then the playoffs were kind of up and down, but not necessarily amazing.
Yeah.
But you kind of assumed and expected that he would be back, right? There was some talks about is it possible that he it's a sign and trade. I think we kind of thought that probably leaned towards he just kind of comes back, but I don't know if we were super confident about him signing a complete new deal. But he ended up signing, like I said, 3-year, $38 million deal. So pretty much Cleveland now is kind of completely, signed long-term deals for all of their starting core guys. So now we're assuming he's going to, return, to this group, and we'll see if they can build on what they did last season, right, where they got to the second round, lost to the Celtics. But I think it's a fine, right? I think like this is, good work done. I think for both sides because I feel like with the Coro, I just don't feel like the grass would have been too much greener, um, if he had, if he hadn't have done this. Because like with Cleveland, you can't let him walk. And it's not that he would have walked, right? But if they didn't get a deal, right, he'd be in the last year, might be like a qualifying offer, and then he just leaves as an unrestricted free agent. And then, for him, if he doesn't sign a deal and he has a bad year, that's a problem. So I think this is fine because I don't really think that anybody would have given him much more than this, anyways, just because of what he is as a player, right? Like he's fine. Like he shot the three ball well last year in the regular season. We know he's a good defender. He can guard multiple positions and he's strong. He's just not giving you much offense. Not that you need like another scorer in Cleveland, but it's just I feel like again, kind of like what Trae Young said about him if he was 6'8". Like I feel like if Isaac Okoro was closer to like 6'7", 6'8", he'd be kind of like almost like a perfect type of wing for this team because I like a lot of what he does, like as a defender, and as a physical, rebounding guy and as a good athlete. I feel like it's just a little undersized as a wing when you already have Mitchell and Garland as two small guards, even though you have Mobley and Allen as your bigs. But, either way, it's good work done by Cleveland, and now they've re-signed their entire young core of guys, and we'll see what they continue to do and if they, can build on it.
Yeah, if every good defender like Isaac Okoro was, maybe Jaden McDaniel size, then yeah, he like, it'd be a different conversation and he'd be um talked about completely differently. But at the end of the day, he is a smaller wing, which is kind of unfortunate considering now we're seeing an influx of skilled wing players and, just bigger players in general that can do a lot with the ball. So it is kind of tough for those smaller defenders to kind of have that niche, I guess. But at the end of the day, I don't hate the deal. I think it's good that he
Not at all.
he he comes back. And yeah, they're continuing to run it back, which is fine. And it's not like, you're locked in for life or anything like this. Like, you can move
Right.
on from these guys.
It's a
They're
3-year deal.
flexible. Yeah, it's a flexible deal. It doesn't, lock you into something where you can't get out of and, you're just going to be, down in the dumps. So, once again, I think it's a good move and it makes sense, I think, for both parties.
Yeah, and then according to the New York Post, right, the Celtics payroll caused the owners rift. Grousbeck family balked at Celtics long-term massive contracts, which is what we kind of talked about before, right? Just the idea that with the new CBA and just the fact that you're going to be paying five guys basically max deals, that's going to be a lot to ask out of anybody, even people who are who have a ton of money. It's just kind of hard for me to imagine, right, them continuing to pay for this roster, like 4 or 5 seasons from now, right? Like, which is kind of wild just because of the fact that they just won the title and could very well win it again, if they continue to stay healthy. But, we'll see how long this group lasts. But obviously, you'll still have Tatum and Brown. But, just kind of wild how it sounds like at a certain point that, they might sell the team, because that's what we were kind of hearing, a couple months ago.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy. I mean, it does make sense though, considering, the amount of money that is being invested into this team. And, we all know that they're going to, do a lot of winning. whether it be in the regular season or postseason. So it is kind of like a good investment, but at the end of the day, I think you do have to weigh your options, and it does make sense for them to kind of pull out and move on.
Yeah. According to The Athletic, Dub's interested in Jimmy. Warriors probably made a couple calls to Heat this
Bro.
summer. Okay. I mean, I think we kind of already heard about this a little bit, but again, at the end of the day, we'll see what happens with Jimmy Butler. We'll see what happens with Golden State, but I don't know. I mean, like I understand it, but who knows? Because, like I said, I just don't know what happens with Butler in the Heat. Because I mean, he's in the last year of his deal. And reportedly he's not going to sign an extension. But if I'm another team, I wouldn't want to. I would be, I don't know if I would trade for him if he's not going to get the extension, unless for sure, that there's, going to be an agreement that hey, if I come here, I'll re-sign in the offseason, which kind of like Siakam, right? He didn't sign an extension, but we knew that he was going to re-sign with them once free agency hit. But I don't know. I don't really like the fit there, but again, if you're Golden State, I can at least understand like, hey, we do need some talent upgrades. Um, you know, so I can understand making the call, but I don't know if that one's getting done. But to be fair, we've heard it a couple of times, so who knows?
Yeah, I'm calling complete BS on that one. I just don't foresee um the Warriors being able to do anything. Um,
I don't think they do anything before the season starts. I think if they do
no.
anything, it'd be more likely, at the earliest, close to the deadline, but more than likely, maybe not even until next summer. I think
I don't
some
think
of
they
it
do
would hinge on
anything.
how well. Yeah, like I think some of it would hinge on how well they do in the regular season, but I don't feel like there's an obvious move anyways, and I don't think that's the obvious move either.
Yeah, they're
So
cooked, bro. It's Warriors and Lakers rumors that actually infuriate me because it's so much smoke and they always think that they're going to get somebody and it's like just give it up, man. Like it's over. It's over. And that's just being blunt and honest. I just don't think the Warriors will be able to pull off any kind of move like that. And I don't think in theory it really even works. Like Jimmy Butler to the Warriors, that just doesn't really leave a good taste in my mouth if you want me to be honest.
yeah, well, speaking of the Lakers, it sounds like they're going to sign Christian Coloco. He was out of the league, had blood clots,
Oof.
which we had heard about, right? But according to his agent, it seems like he's, recovered and they've been able to correct that. And now he's healthy enough to play basketball. So shout out to him, right? So being able to return to the league. It sounds like it might be like a two-way contract, right? Because right before we started recording, it sounded like that they were going to waive two-way guard Blake Hinson, right? So, because again, they don't have an actual roster spot. So, and we also know because I don't think we had talked about it, but Christian Wood, right, reportedly is going to be out for at least 8 weeks because he had another knee surgery, right? I guess in response to the knee surgery that didn't, that unfortunately couldn't, repair him from earlier in the year, right? So they need some depth at center, right? Because all they have is outside of AD is Jackson Hayes. And so that means if AD is out and misses any significant time, you have a major problem on your hands. So we'll see. But again, it's a two-way contract. Not that that means a lot, but again, like just a bad situation to be in where outside of AD, the only other bigs you can really rely on is Jackson Hayes, and then two-way guys.
Yeah, I mean, at least they're doing something to kind of correct a little bit of the
Mhm.
misfortune that's happening. So I think I like the signing just based on the fact that yeah, you get another backup big
Yeah,
potentially.
athletic, shot blocking guy. We'll see.
Yeah,
And then last but not least, Knicks signed Marcus Morris Sr. to an Exhibit 9 contract, which I had not heard of. I had only heard of Exhibit 10.
same.
But basically, again, it means that he's going to compete for a final roster spot. It's like a non-guaranteed 1-year deal that protects the team in case of a significant injury to the player. They also signed Landry Shamet, so we'll see what happens with him. They're basically competing for the last roster spot. It would have been nice if one of those had gone to a big, but I guess, maybe they're comfortable with like, Precious Achua, and then Jericho Sims backing up Julius Randle and Mitchell Robinson. So, I guess it could be either Marcus Morris Sr. as another wing or Landry Shamet as like another guard. But I mean, we don't really need to debate or discuss who gets that last roster spot.
No.
I don't think that one really matters. But, if either guy makes the team, it's a decent veteran to kind of add to the mix. And Marcus Morris, for what it's worth, played for the Knicks before.
Yeah.
So.
And Shamit can
Not
shoot.
on, yeah, not under this regime.
No.
Because I think it was when David Fizdale was there, and that was way before Jalen Brunson, because that was the bubble year, because he was traded midway through the season to the Clippers.
Yeah.
But either way, he's not the same guy at this point. So this is kind of like an end of the bench rotational guy, kind of like what with Markieff Morris signing for Dallas, where he's not going to play a whole lot, but it's a locker room guy. That's always a valuable guy to have.
Yeah. 100%.
That's there.
100%.
Yeah, so that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts in the comments about the Spurs and their offseason, your expectations for what they are going to do, your expectations for Wemby, and let us know your thoughts on, some of the news around the league. Do you like the Isaac Okoro contract? What do you think of the Celtics, possibly not being able to afford the team long term? What do you think of Jimmy Butler going to Golden State? So let us know your thoughts in the comments. Again, we continue to appreciate the comments that we've gotten in the last several videos. Again, if you comment, we will read them at the beginning of the video, or we'll pick one and read it at the beginning of the video. And continue to like and subscribe, help out the channel, help our channel grow. We've blown past the 100 subscribers goal. Now we're trying to get to 500, and we're halfway to 200. So help us out there, and we'll see you in the next video.